Does anyone know anyone who embellishes or exaggerates stories? I mean, apart from fishermen, because obviously they do, it's this big. Well, let's not have any finger pointing just yet. But let's have some real honesty right now. You can put your hands up to this one. Who does know someone who tells stories of maybe things that have happened to them or things they've seen, but they maybe add a detail here or there or miss a detail out here or there to make it either more exciting or less boring or more mysterious? Hands up if you know anybody like that. Right. John, could you tell me who it is, please? The church, down the ages, has done its fair share of this, adding things and removing things, and they add traditions to truth. And while some, maybe many of those can be helpful, quite a number of them can get in the way. They can get in the way of the truth. And over the years, I believe this has been true of today's very familiar passage. This story of the Magi. It's only found in Matthew's account of Jesus. And Matthew's account, which was what we read, 12 verses I think, Matthew's account contains all that we need to establish what God may be saying to us that's as fresh today and as relevant today as it was for people 2,000 years ago. We do not need to add anything to it or take anything from it to hear what God might be saying. So I thought we'd just start by looking at this account a little more closely, what we do know and what we don't know. We need to clear out some of the stuff that has got in the way to find this out. We need to hear what God might be saying to us through this account that was written over 2,000 years ago, today, in West Auckland, as followers of Jesus. We do know roughly where they went. This group of wise people went to Jerusalem. It tells us that. Got it. We do know roughly when they went. It says in the time of King Herod. And we know that he reigned until just after Jesus' birth, a little while after Jesus' birth. So we know roughly when they went and where they went. It's not very precise, is it? But get used to it. There are lots of things in this story not particularly precise. We don't really know precisely where I am in the text. We don't really know precisely where they were from, other than from the east, somewhere in Persia. It's that much is not really in doubt. Modern day Iran and Iraq. That narrows it down to about 1.1 million square miles, in case you were wondering. And if we look at one of the closest borders of that area to where Jerusalem is, we're looking at a distance of about 1,200 miles. That's a long walk. If you want to know how long it is, if this helps you put it in some sort of frame, it's like leave here today and walk to Madrid. Okay, you've got a long swim or a bit of a ferry journey over one, but that's the sort of distance we're talking about. Here to Madrid. That is a hike. Longer than your average dog walk, that's for sure. But it's much harder than walking from here to Madrid because it was nearly all through desert, much of which was home to bandits. So we do know that we're looking at a journey time of, at the very least, if everything went well, 50 days minimum. The thought of a difficult journey, hardship, uncertainty, risk, all of which that journey contained in that area at that time, didn't put those Magi off. Not one bit. whatever it was they had been told, whatever it was they had heard from God, they considered the value was worth the cost. Indeed, the value was worth far more than whatever the cost was going to be. So we don't know precisely where they come from. We don't know when they actually arrived in Jerusalem, and we don't know when they actually left Jerusalem. We don't know how many of them there were. We assume there were 3, well, some people do, because 3 gifts are mentioned. Now, my sons, one of whom is here today, and their wives, I totted up how many separate wrapped gifts I got from them this year. And across them, it was about 12. But I can assure you there weren't 12 of them, there's only 4 of them. So you can't necessarily infer the numbers of people from the numbers of gifts that they brought. Mind, it all sounds nice in songs, the bits they've sort of made up and added, doesn't it? Makes for a nice carol. Other parts of the church, mainly in the East, have always believed there were 12 Magi. But we often don't read much outside of our tradition, so we don't realise things like that. We think what we believe must be right. But others have different views, so that's a bit imprecise and uncertain as well. They definitely were not kings. There's no doubt about that. They weren't kings. They were Magi, and the word used is quite precise. Often translated wise men. Not wise in the way that we might think. You wouldn't invite them down to the pub quiz. Not that sort of wise. They were wise in different ways. They were Gentiles. They weren't Jews. And the word Magi basically means stargazers. They were pagan, Zoroastrian astrologers and amateur astronomers. They were more Russell Grant than Brian Cox. Only the oldies know who Russell Grant was, of course. They read the stars to try and determine future events. They interpreted dreams. Pretty much everything we as Christians would shy away from. And rightly so. We assume they were men. Doesn't say that. And in their particular culture, what we know for definite is there were female Magi. The Zoroastrians in particular were quite inclusive in that way. So we can't say for certain they were men. But again, it sort of feels right to lots of people. Although there's many women would say if they were wise, they can't have been men. That's simple as that. The word Magi that's used is a gender-inclusive word. It can be male or female. The word itself doesn't tell you anything about that. We've added just bits that make it easier or nicer or more culturally acceptable for us. I don't know. But we have. We certainly don't know the names of these Magi. But over the years, the church has embellished and added to the story. So suddenly we have 3 wise men, or even kings, whose names were allegedly Melchior, Caspar and Balthazar. Where on earth did they dig those up from? I'm surprised we haven't got the CVs, passport numbers and the names of the dogs as well, to be honest. Just keep adding on to it. They certainly weren't at the stable with Mary, Joseph and the sheep, because we are told they went to the house where Jesus was. We don't know exactly when, we don't know exactly where, but we know they weren't at the stable. I know that's ruined many a nativity scene for people. Sorry about that. They went to the house. So we have stargazers, astrologers, dream interpreters from somewhere east of Jerusalem, setting off on a long and dangerous journey, arriving sometime after Jesus' birth, carrying very valuable gifts of gold, frankincense and myrrh, because they believed the stars were telling them to. I don't know what they heard and how they thought they heard it, or what they saw and where they thought they saw it. No idea. And the Bible chooses not to give us any more detail than that. It's quite a tale. although it's more than just stars that we're talking about. So just after Jesus' birth, the Jews had been, the Jews for years actually been scattered, the diaspora, they'd been scattered all over the place. Many of them were in that area, Persia, Babylon, Iran, Iraq as we call them nowadays, and they had taken their Hebrew scriptures with them. We know that for sure. There's plenty of them being found over there. In fact, part of what the Jews still use, I think it's called the Babylonian Talmud, was written when they were over there in exile. And these Zoroastrian priests were keen on understanding what other people believed. They will have had access to and almost certainly read parts of the Old Testament and particularly the prophecies they were going around. For instance, Micah 5:2, but you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel. They would almost certainly have been familiar with these prophecies. They will almost certainly have been interested in them. That was the nature of their faith and beliefs. Isaiah 7:14, we know this, the virgin will conceive and bear a son. Emmanuel, meaning what? God with us. Now, to anybody who was seeking these truths, this notion of a prophecy that said God was going to be actually with us, visit us here, that was quite intriguing to them. Another one from Isaiah, the coming of the child we know as Jesus, calling him Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. These words are amazing, that the familiarity we have with them can take away some of the power and beauty that they actually have. But to these people who were perhaps reading them for the first time, who were studying for all sorts of things everywhere in the stars and dreams, and they must have come across like something utterly amazing. It's no wonder the interest of these Magi, whoever they were and however many of them there were, was piqued. It does seem to me as though the Lord is saying you don't need to know any of these details to hear what God is telling us through the story, through the account of the Magi. You don't need to know how many there were. You don't need to know if they were men or women. You don't need to know precisely where they're from. You don't need to know what time they arrived and what time they left. The account in Matthew is all we need to know for what God's telling us. But let's look at the gifts they brought. There's lots goes on with the gifts as well. Gold, frankincense and myrrh. Notice the Bible tells us what the gifts were. It doesn't go into any of the fancy stuff about that I've read about, gold was this and gold was that and myrrh was this and therefore this is. It doesn't do anything. It just tells us what they were. And what we do know from those times is that they were incredibly expensive gifts. They were sacrificial gifts. And what we do know in those cultures, and this includes the Jewish culture of the time, that gold, frankincense and myrrh, when given as a gift together, were usually gifts that were given to honour royalty or to acknowledge deity. So we can tell that. And that was a clear message from these wise men. What they had picked up and heard or seen or understood from the prophecies, or a combination of all three, they knew that this journey they were going on from here to Madrid equivalent, a really tough journey full of risks, possibly hardships, but they were taking gifts to give to royalty, to acknowledge deity. And what did they say they were going to do? We are going to worship. Before they ever got there, before they ever knew any of the real details, they knew they had to go and they had to worship this child. Now, I find that amazing. You don't need any more than the story in Matthew to find that utterly amazing. That should happen, that God should break through and communicate to those people to such an extent they were prepared to make that journey, find that child, give him the gifts and worship him. That is some story. Of course, down the ages, the church has built up many detailed explanations as to the precise meaning of the gifts. Personally, I think they are later additions, they're add-ons, rather more fanciful religious dressing than the need to know category. And now to the Magi themselves. What message does God speak to us through the Magi? Who they were? I would say they represent all non-Jews. They were Gentiles. They were pagans. They were from different faiths and religions. And yet God broke through into their lives and spoke to them. Which in itself, again, I find utterly amazing. They represent us, folks, unless you happen to have been born a Jew. They represent us and everyone like us, and it's a powerful message for us. It lets us know God's heart on this matter. We are all invited to this party, to that house, to that child, to worship. We don't need any add-ons, any embellishments, any exaggeration to know that from those Magi. We were always included. It was always part of the Father's plan. Always. It wasn't an add-on. He didn't think, it would be a good idea if. It was always part of his plan. He got those Magi to that place at that time. And them and everyone like them, seekers of truth, who were prepared for the journey, will have a share in the kingdom. They are invited to the party. They will share in the benefits. With the same status as the Jews. For there is neither Jew, nor Greek, nor Gentile. God loves the whole world. That's the whole world. That word is a powerful word, not the world bit, the whole bit. All of it, every bit, and it means cosmos. It's more than just the earth. And I don't think God has a partial love. Yeah, I really love you, but I really love them a bit more. I don't read that. And that's a powerful message for us. And it's good news for us to share. A message that reinforced the prophetic teaching they would have been reading. But we still don't know exactly how God communicated that to them. There's talk of a star, but I know the astronomers, the real ones, have looked back to see whether there was any notable starry stuff going on at that time. And they say for the most part there wasn't, or I believe there were a couple of planets in conjunction or whatever that is, but nobody's sure. So we don't really know exactly how God communicated this amazing truth that was powerful enough and clear enough to get them to set out on that journey with a determination to worship that child. It's fantastic. These slightly mysterious foreign non-Jews serve as an example and a model that we can learn from in so many ways. Their desire to seek the truth at all costs and at any cost is amazing. Imagine you think you've heard from God. You've read a prophecy, which is somebody else's prophecy. There's something to do with a star, and you think, I tell you what, tomorrow I'm just going to walk to Madrid to find out all about it. Would you? Doubt I would. They did. They were seekers after truth. They were determined seekers after truth. And we all know what God has said. Those who seek will find. He maybe didn't say anything about the 1,500 walk in between, but he did say those who seek will find. And they were seeking. Are we still seeking? Are we still seekers after the truth? We see in their story a God who will break the rules, who will knock down the barriers, who will smash through the things that are blocking in order to communicate with the people he loves and the people he's calling. He will stop at nothing. And we know that from the Christmas story. He will stop at nothing to get through, to communicate. Despite the pagan astrology, which the Old Testament condemns, by the way, the dream interpreting, the seeking wisdom in the planets and the stars, and quite frankly some of the other rubbish that filled their heads, God was still determined to use whatever they were using to communicate to them. To such an extent that they trusted him enough to set off in the first place. I wonder what that felt like. I wonder if, at what point they thought, are we doing the right thing here? Are we sure that's what we actually heard? But the story tells us they arrived. They worshipped. They gave sacrificial gifts to Jesus. The God who wants to communicate his love and truth to anybody and everybody. He took this, by our standards, ridiculous mix, partial understanding, partial prophetic snippets, a dose of astrology, a bit of stargazing, maybe a bit of dream interpretation here and there, mixed up. But God was determined, and he managed to find a way through all of that to communicate to them. And they trusted. It's amazing. And the reason I've asked for the next song to be, we can all sing it or just listen to it at this point, is Reckless Love, and is to remind us that he will stop at nothing. He'll tear down the walls, he'll climb the mountains, he will reach the people he loves. And that's us, and that's our friends, and that's our family. In fact, it's the whole of the world. So let's listen or sing this together, and then we'll wrap it up.